When the guns finally fell silent in Europe, tens of thousands of German tanks sat abandoned across a shattered continent. Once symbols of terror and technological ambition, they now lay burned out, buried, or eerily intact in fields, forests, and ruined cities. But their story didn't end in May 1945. Some were melted down, others studied, reused, even reborn under new flags. So, what truly happened to the machines that once carried the Third Reich to war? In the spring of 1945, the landscape of Europe was littered with the remains of Germany's armored forces. From the hedgerows of Normandy to the plains of Hungary, Panzers, Panthers, Tigers, and assault guns sat frozen in time. Many destroyed in combat, others abandoned due to fuel shortages, mechanical failure, or sheer chaos as the Reich collapsed. These tanks were not merely wreckage. They were artifacts of one of the most intense industrial and military efforts in history, and in the aftermath of the war, they became objects of scrutiny, exploitation, and, in some cases, quiet disappearance. The immediate fate of most German tanks was brutally simple. They were scrapped. Europe in 1945 was starving for raw materials. Cities lay in ruins, railways destroyed, factories bombed flat. Steel was desperately needed for reconstruction, and the hulks of armored vehicles provided a ready source. Across occupied Germany and former battlefields, Allied salvage units moved in with cutting torches and cranes. Burned-out hulls were dismantled where they lay. Intact vehicles were towed to collection points, stripped and cut apart. Even the most famous machines of the war were not spared. Tigers that had once dominated entire sectors of the Eastern Front were reduced to molten steel, recycled into bridges, buildings, and rail lines. Yet not all tanks were destroyed immediately. The Allies, particularly the United States, the Soviet Union, and Britain, recognized the value of German armored technology. During the war, German tank design had often outpaced that of its enemies, especially in optics, armor layout, and high-velocity guns. After the surrender, intact vehicles were carefully catalogued and shipped east and west for evaluation. Proving grounds that had once tested Allied weapons now echoed with the roar of captured German engines. In the United States, several Panther tanks were sent to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. There, American engineers examined their sloped armor, overlapping road wheels, and powerful 75mm KWK-42 gun. The Panther's design influenced post-war thinking about main battle tanks, even as its mechanical unreliability served as a cautionary tale. American reports noted its excellent firepower and protection, but also highlighted its vulnerability to breakdowns and maintenance issues, especially under combat conditions. Britain conducted similar tests, comparing German tanks to their own designs. The Tiger I, in particular, impressed British analysts with its thick armor and accurate 88mm gun. But its immense weight and logistical burden confirmed British skepticism toward overly heavy tanks. These evaluations quietly shaped the next generation of Western armored doctrine, favoring balanced designs over brute force. In the Soviet Union, captured German tanks were subjected to relentless testing, often to destruction. Soviet engineers fired their own guns at German armor to measure penetration, tested suspension systems under extreme conditions, and ran engines until failure. The Soviets were less interested in preserving the vehicles and more focused on extracting lessons for their own rapidly evolving tank programs. Elements of German optics and gun design found echoes in later Soviet developments, though the Red Army remained committed to simpler, mass-producible machines. While many tanks were scrapped or studied, a surprising number found second lives in foreign armies. War had left much of Europe impoverished, and newly reconstituted or emerging states needed armored vehicles quickly and cheaply. Captured German tanks, already available in large numbers, filled the gap. France was among the first to put former enemy tanks back into service. In the immediate post-war years, the French army operated Panthers, Panzers, and even a handful of Panthers. These vehicles were used not only for training, but also in active service, including during the early stages of the Indochina War. French Panthers were maintained with difficulty, spare parts being scarce, but they provided valuable firepower at a time when France's own armored industry was still recovering. Czechoslovakia became another unexpected caretaker of German armor. With much of its industry intact, the country refurbished and even produced vehicles based on German designs. The Jagdpanzer 3018T, better known as the Hetzer, continued to be manufactured after the war and served in the Czechoslovak army. Some of these vehicles were later exported, including to Switzerland, where they remained in service for years. In the Middle East, German tanks also appeared, far from the ruins of Europe. Syria acquired several Panzer IVs and Stugee 3 assault guns through post-war arms deals and surplus sales. These vehicles saw combat once again during the Arab-Israeli conflicts of the late 1940s and 1950s. In a strange twist of history, German-designed tanks fought against Israeli forces that themselves operated a mix of British, French, and later American armor. By the 1960s, most of these German vehicles were obsolete, destroyed, or abandoned. But their presence underscored how far the legacy of the Wehrmacht's armor had traveled. Not all German tanks left the battlefield. Many were simply buried. In the immediate aftermath of the war, clearing roads and farmland took priority over archaeological preservation. Destroyed or irreparable tanks were pushed into craters, ravines, or hastily dug pits and covered with earth. In Eastern Europe, especially in Poland, Belarus, and Western Russia, tanks disappeared beneath fields that would be plowed for decades. Even today, construction projects occasionally unearth rusted hulls, silent reminders of battles long past. Some tanks met more dramatic ends. Ammunition and fuel left inside abandoned vehicles posed serious dangers. Allied engineers sometimes destroyed tanks in place with explosives to prevent accidents or misuse. In urban areas, hulks were blown apart to clear streets and stabilize ruins. These controlled demolitions erased many vehicles from the historical record entirely. A small number of German tanks escaped destruction by entering museums and private collections. In the late 1940s and 1950s, historical preservation was not a major priority, but a few forward-thinking officers and curators recognized the significance of these machines. Tanks were set aside for display, often restored using parts scavenged from multiple wrecks. The Tiger 131, captured intact by British forces in Tunisia in 1943, became one of the most famous survivors. Preserved at the Bovington Tank Museum in England, it remains the only operational Tiger 1 in the world today. In the United States, several German tanks were placed in museums and military bases as trophies and educational exhibits. Others ended up as gate guardians, sitting quietly at the entrances to barracks and depots. Over time, many were scrapped due to neglect or lack of funds, but a handful survived into the modern era, painstakingly restored by historians and enthusiasts. The fate of German tank crews after the war added another layer to this story. Many former Panzer commanders and engineers were interrogated extensively by Allied intelligence. Figures like Heinz Guderian, though primarily a theorist and commander rather than a tank designer, were questioned about German armored doctrine. Engineers who had worked on tanks like the Panther and Tiger were recruited into post-war research programs, particularly in the West. Their knowledge contributed indirectly to NATO armored development during the early Cold War, even as Germany itself was forbidden from possessing tanks for several years. In East Germany, under Soviet control, the memory of German tanks was deliberately suppressed. The new National People's Army adopted Soviet equipment and doctrine, and remnants of Wehrmacht armor were either destroyed or relegated to scrapyards. In West Germany, rearmament in the 1950s came with American oversight. When German tank production resumed, it did so under a completely different political and ethical framework, leading eventually to designs like the Leopard 1, which bore little resemblance to the heavy, complex machines of the Nazi era. Culturally, German tanks took on a mythic status in the post-war years. The Tiger and Panther became symbols of supposed German technological superiority, often exaggerated in popular media and memoirs. Veterans on all sides remembered the fear these tanks inspired, sometimes inflating their numbers and effectiveness. Post-war analysis revealed a more nuanced reality. German tanks were formidable, but they were also plagued by production bottlenecks, fuel shortages, and mechanical fragility. Their ultimate fate after the war reflected that contradiction. Admired, studied, reused, but ultimately consumed by the practical needs of a devastated world. By the late 1950s, most surviving German tanks had disappeared. Scrapyards had done their work. Foreign armies moved on to newer equipment. Battlefields were cleared or reclaimed by nature. What remained were fragments, a turret in a forest, a hull at the bottom of a river, a restored vehicle behind museum ropes. Each survivor carried layers of meaning, not just as a weapon, but as a physical link to a war that reshaped the modern world. The tanks of Nazi Germany were built for conquest and destruction, yet their final roles were often quiet and unglamorous. They became raw material for rebuilding, teaching tools for future armies, or silent exhibits warning of where unchecked ambition can lead. Their steel outlived the regime that created them, but it did not escape history's judgment. If you found this video insightful, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and ringing the notification bell so you don't miss future documentaries. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.